Specialists whose brains are picked to program expert systems are delighted to produce machines that are cleverer than they are. They feel a pride of authorship. But what about the rest of us, who have not been consulted? How will we feel? Computers seem set to learn at a rate which far outstrips our speed of learning. They may even understand what they learn. But the hallmark of human intelligence is the eureka effect. Will computers be able to come up with anything new?
My name's Karen Sandler. I am a lawyer. I am a cyborg lawyer. A few years ago, while I was already a lawyer with the Software Freedom Law Center, I found out that I had a heart condition. I have an enlarged and obstructed heart. It's called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I don't have any symptoms, it's all fine, but I'm at a very high risk of suddenly dying. If you hear about kids that are, running to second base and drop dead all of a sudden, they often have what I have. And so it's all well and good. There are some preventive medications I could take, but the main thing is that to prevent suddenly dying, I was prescribed a pacemaker defibrillator. It was like people following me around paddle. If I passed out, I would get a shock, it would be implanted, it would be great. After dealing with the idea that I needed to get this device, which was quite, stressful for anybody to hear that they need something implanted in their bodies, I started asking more about it, and the doctor showed me the device, and he said, this is what you need, and you should get it implanted right away. And so I asked, because I was a lawyer at the Software Freedom Law Center, well, what does it run? And he couldn't tell me. That entire doctor's office had never thought about the issues of software on these medical devices. It was a little bit strange. I literally had to get proprietary software hooked up to my heart and implanted in my body. I did it because I couldn't walk around at risk for suddenly dying every day. My parents, everyone I loved, was really angry at me for holding up on this issue. For them, it was this abstract idea. Who cares what software is running on your device? It's gonna save your life, you need it.
This decision about technology and what kind of technology stack we have will define the rules that are the new laws of how society works. And people will structure society based on what the software allows them to do and not based on what the laws are written, because the software becomes this new set of laws that constrain society.
They're working towards constructing their own immortality and their own infinite pleasure, and not just for themselves, but for their whole community, and they perceive even for all of humanity itself. The dystopian consequences of their work is not what is most present in their mind.
Software is so important to so many things. And if you can control the software, it's like controlling the flow of oil. You can turn off access to certain features to other companies. I don't think it's a surprise or a coincidence that there's a lot of talk about monopolies in software.
The freedoms that the internet brings to people, if you look at all the revolutions and things that have been happening in the Middle East, it's amazing. And those things couldn't have happened in that way before the internet existed. It really makes a difference to people's lives and to democracy.
No one contributes to a community that only benefits one person. That's just not how it works. The core element of community is that when you make a contribution, the community benefits from it. The altruistic, moral perspective is what drives all of this technology forward.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
shiny hardware gets the attention, but it's the software code behind the screen that's making the magic happen. A computer is willing to divide by zero all day long. In reality, the possibilities of technology are limited only by the imagination of the users and the license agreements. With the internet, people can learn and create in their pajamas. The current copyright system was created by people who didn't imagine millions of digital projects built remotely, or that it would cost basically nothing to make more copies. The baby boomer generation of programmers made a mistake. They forgot the scientific tradition of sharing results. Starting in the late 1980s, a new kind of license agreement was created, which increased freedom and the pace of scientific progress. Not everyone will exercise their right to change their software. In the past, not many people owned a printing press, but it was widely understood that a free press was important to the civil society. Those who don't write software can still help protect this freedom for others.
The first computers in the 1960s that people bought were giant mainframes. They were incredibly expensive to deliver, to cool, to maintain. And companies like IBM developed these computers and in the end just sort of gave software away as an afterthought. They realized that no one was going to buy one of these giant computers that needed a special air conditioner and had to be installed in a special way in some special room unless they could do something with it. So the software was added as an afterthought, and the cost of doing software was nominal compared to the cost of making the computer. And over time, computers obviously got smaller, and they still are getting smaller today. And the idea of having a computer that individuals could buy became initially a hobbyist activity. There were many individuals in the 1970s who got very excited about buying and sharing computers. And I remember as a young child, the first computers that my father brought home were these kinds of hobbyist machines that you could look at and modify. And in fact, they were very similar to the software freedom communities we see today, because they swapped the software once they got the machine, and of course there was also a hardware component of putting it together and assembling it. But then you started adding some software to it and writing software yourselves and sharing it with your friends at these things called computer clubs. Well, at the same time that all that was happening, there were various different software companies that were focusing on making lots of money as opposed to necessarily joining a community and sharing software.
How much do you think this advanced operating environment is worth? Wait just 1 minute before you answer. Watch as Windows integrates Lotus 123 with Miami Vice. Wait until you see Windows Light and Windows Paint, and then listen to what else you get at no extra charge. The MS-DOS Executive, an appointment calendar, a card file, a notepad, a clock, a control panel, a terminal, a print spooler, RAM driver, and, can you believe it, Reversi. That's right, all these features in Reversi, all for just, how much did you guess? 500? 1,000? Even more? No, it's just $99. That's right. It's $99.
There's a very famous letter to hobbyists that Bill Gates wrote in the 1970s saying that the idea of sharing software is stealing. And that's where the division really begins. Ironically, right around the 1980s, as Microsoft was getting started, is exactly when my colleague Richard Stallman decided to start the software freedom movement and wrote a document called the GNU Manifesto that in some ways I tend to think of as an answer to the letter of hobbyists. Now, RMS didn't write it as an answer. He wrote it because it was what he believed was the right thing to do for software users. But when you put those two documents up next to each other, you sort of see two philosophies of how software ought to be done.
Paid-for software with restrictive licenses are still the more common type today. Linux runs on about 1% of desktops and laptops. Many companies depend on free software, but prefer to keep their innovations secret. Google is working on a lot of artificial intelligence code in private, and many other companies are also. Google released a neural network system called TensorFlow in 2015, but most of their software and data to make it intelligent remain hidden.
If you use Google Photos and you upload a photo, it knows how to categorize what's in your photo. Now, how does it possibly know that that's a picture of a giraffe or a car or what have you? Well, the answer is it's been trained, right? We showed it picture after picture. And in the 1970s, people tried this and it didn't work. And then there was sort of this, what is called the AI winter, sort of about 20 years, and nothing happened. And then a set of mathematicians figured out a way to build what are called deep neural networks. And they are layers of these computer models that are very complicated. And the first layer says, this is a picture, it has boundaries, here are pixels. The second layer says, here are where the shapes are. The third says, here's a shape here, and here's a relationship. And there are typically 9 or 10 levels, and the 10th level says, it's a giraffe, it's a car, it's a person.
When I was heading up Google X a few years back, and one little project we had in there, which is now called Google Brain, which was this AI effort, but I didn't pay attention to it at all, to be perfectly honest. And myself having been trained as a computer scientist in the 90s, everybody knew AI didn't work. It's not like, people tried it, they tried neural nets, none of them worked out. And this fellow who was, one of our top computer scientists, Jeff Dean, would periodically come up with me and, look, the computer made a picture of a cat. I'd say, okay, that's very nice, Jeff, go do your thing, whatever. And fast forward a few years, and now Brain probably touches every single one of our main projects.
If you look at something like Google Translate, that's amazing. I mean, it's pretty hard to learn, 8 languages, let alone 65 languages. That's really remarkable. The field of artificial intelligence used to be called AIMT, Artificial Intelligence Machine Translation. This machine translation was basically to tap into funding streams from the National Security Agency because they had to translate all their intercepts. But the machine translation part is basically done. How did that happen? Was it tens of thousands of programmers making lots of grammar rules from all sorts of different languages? No, the breakthrough is it's looking at translations of UN speeches and EU regulations. And there's many, many language pairs of the same document. And with millions of Rosetta Stones, you're able to construct a computer which can learn the principles of language and therefore translate.
When you get a program from, say, a proprietary software company like Microsoft, you're left effectively helpless. You don't have the right to study the software and even learn how it works. You just get the compiled version of the program that's in binary form that only the computer can understand.
I have been to one meeting with Steve Jobs. That's like almost 10 years ago. He was trying to convince me to start working on OS X instead of Linux. And I said, sure, if you switch it to Linux, but it wasn't going to happen.
Now I'd like to go through the architecture of Mac OS X with you. To start off with, we need a kernel. And that kernel we call Darwin. Darwin's amazing. It's a super modern kernel. And it's got protected memory, preemptive multitasking, modern networking, all the things you'd expect, done in a very elegant way. And it's very Linux-like, very much so. It's got free BSD Unix, which is the same as Linux.
Apple picked the BSD software on purpose. They knew about copyleft by the time they picked it. They avoided picking copylefted programs because they specifically want to lock up users and not let them share and improve their software. Devices that they themselves own. They can't do anything with them other than, well, if it breaks, call Apple.
Copyleft uses copyright, but to keep it free. It's like a completely spinning around of the copyright system, and instead of using it to control, it uses it to share. It has a kind of a snowball effect. If you improve it, those changes, if you're publishing them, also have to stay under the same license. So the body of free software just grows and grows and grows. People call it forever free, and I think it's just such an amazing concept.
In some cases, the free software equivalents to proprietary applications are not as well known or quite good enough yet, so people continue to pay billions for closed software and give little to the free software movement.
Change is very emotional. People don't like change. No one likes to move house. No one likes to buy a new car. And no one wants to change software. The relationship that a lot of people have with their, like regular people, not geeks, the relationship they have with their computers is one of, it's basically hanging by a thread, and I'm terrified it's all gonna go down at some point. So the idea of changing to this whole new world is terrifying.
You think about most people in front of a computer, they don't actually like their computer. Like they're using a computer because it's part of their job. They like using it in the sense that it does a lot for them, but usually they just curse things when things go wrong. They don't want to tweak things. They want to do stuff the way they're used to doing things.
CompuWare was formed in 1973 and is one of the largest proprietary software companies specializing in the mainframe business.
So why the use of a proprietary software license? It really comes down to that's our business model, and that's where we're going to make our money and our profit and pay for our employees. So it really comes down to that we have something that is novel, patentable, that we can actually turn a profit on that's in the industry. We are a commercial software company, and our customers expect a certain level of innovation from us that provides them some competitive advantage as well. CompuWare has always been in the business of selling software, and we make our money out of the innovation that we put in our software and the creativity that we put in our software, as well as the maintenance and support that we provide behind that software.
In much of the developing world, there's very strict enforcement of companies using proprietary software. And so you can get fined and you can have your office raided and the computers seized. The Software Publishers Associations were able to push through much more draconian laws in the developing world. NGOs that were opposing the government in Russia were also having their whole NGOs shut down and their computers seized on the premise that they were using unlicensed software. It's a rule that you know you're breaking so they can come in and arrest you for it.
The reason software monopolies happen so easily without open source is that software is fundamentally something you build on top of. So if you own the thing that you built on top of, nobody else can really even begin to compete because they have to build the whole base, and it can take them 5 years to build what you have today. In the meantime, during those 5 years, you built on top of yours and improved it. So it's very hard to really catch up.
When your mail client is hosted at Google, Google could decide that they're going to suspend your account, and then you disappear, and all of your information disappears. If we can't have free software to run all these services, and if we're relying on sharecropping other people's software and other people's technology, then they could always remove us, and they could always make us disappear. Your digital life could be destroyed in a minute, and it could be a mistake.
Free or open source software means that the code, documentation, and discussions are available to the public. This allows anyone to better understand or help improve it. Wikipedia was created in 2001 and is a great example of free content and a powerful software system to maintain it. Many people spend free time in online communities, whether to play games or improve public resources like Wikipedia.
For a while, at least in the US, there was an encyclopedia that was printed called the Britannica. Not sure why, it was an American encyclopedia. It wasn't called Americana, it was called Britannica. But anyway, Britannica was the biggest encyclopedia around. Then we created a little DVD, CD, with something called Encarta, and we became the biggest encyclopedia company in the world. Now there's Wikipedia.
Having lots of eyes and having lots and lots of minds being applied to something really allows it to evolve and become greater than the sum of its parts. I think this model and this idea can really be applied to just about anything. The Wikimedia Foundation is all about providing free content and keeping the lights on for a whole host of different wiki projects, including Wikipedia, Wikiquotes, Wikispecies, Wiktionary, and a bunch of other ones. The whole thing behind a wiki is just that it's a way that anybody can create content and share content. And it's a little bit different than, say, just slapping up a web page because anybody can come and edit it. And so there's this constant evolution of content that's going on. There have definitely been a number of studies done that have actually shown that Wikipedia is as accurate, if not more accurate in some cases, than encyclopedias like the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Wikipedia itself is in fact an extremely important resource for mathematicians. A lot of the articles in Wikipedia about serious mathematical research topics such as the Riemann hypothesis, are in fact extremely good articles. It's really, really surprising how good the quality of Wikipedia articles has evolved. If you flip open a traditional encyclopedia and try to look for research mathematics, you just kind of chuckle at how incomplete it is. But Wikipedia is really much, much better.
Well, Wikipedia and all these other wiki projects that the Wikimedia Foundation helps run are all built on free software. It's a piece of free software called MediaWiki, which is the most popular and widely used wiki platform that's out there. And even beyond just the software that powers all of this, there's this free and open source ethic that pervades the sort of culture behind Wikipedia. And that's this idea that we can collaborate together to build something better. In Wikipedia's case, that's building a body of knowledge, collecting the sum of all human knowledge.
Wikis are powerful tools of collaboration that require an operating system to run on. Wikipedia, along with billions of other servers and devices, depend on Linux.
Another bolt of lightning is that Apple plus Microsoft equals 100% of the desktop computer market.
The Linux kernel controls access to the processor, memory, and all the other devices. Surrounding the kernel is a lot of user mode software to build a complete operating system, which is also known as Linux, or sometimes GNU/Linux.
It's kind of hard to explain a kernel because the whole point of a kernel is to hide the hardware details to the programs you actually use. So you never use a kernel. You would, if a kernel is visible, there's something wrong. The kernel is handling the disk layout for you. The kernel is handling memory allocation. The kernel is handling CPU and networking, but it's not doing something that you actually interact with. I mean, it actually does everything you interact with in the sense that it, for example, reads the keys you type in on the keyboard, but at the same time, it's not the thing that reacts to what you're actually typing. It's kind of this hidden infrastructure, the thing that you're supposed to ignore. If I'm on a bus or subway, I wouldn't try to explain it. It's just too hard. It's the things I do every day are about looking up file names and translating the file names that normal applications use into the blocks on disk. Most normal people say, what blocks on disk?
I've been a programmer since I was a kid, doing programming on different machines over the years. In college, my girlfriend came back from a class and said, I heard this guy named Richard Stallman gave a talk. Have you ever heard of him? I was like, no, what's that? So I looked it up and then I learned all about the free software movement. After school, I went off and did embedded programming. And then one time at one job, we were using a Unix called SCO Unix. And it wasn't really working as well. We had some problems with it and somebody said, hey, let's try something called Linux. It should work on there, and it did. So we used it in one of our products we made. And then I kind of just used it for a while. Another job I was at, and I was like, hey, I can change this stuff. I did, and Linus took my patches. I was like, hey, this is fun. And I started writing code, and I realized that more people were using the code I wrote for free as a hobby than anything I'd ever been paid for. I wasn't working for very profitable companies. So then over time, I started doing more and more, and then I got offered a job doing it. And I've been doing it for, getting paid for it for ever since.
Linux as an operating system works on so many platforms and has so many fewer bugs than other stuff because it has 10 million people who can view it. It has all these people who can see the problems, report bugs, and fix bugs.
Making hardware work well is hard. Other operating systems like Apple has control over their hardware, so they can make their operating system work really, really well with their hardware, and that's great. Windows runs on every hardware, so they have the same problem we do with Linux, and that has to run on everywhere. All the drivers for Linux are in the kernel. This is unlike other operating systems where all the drivers are outside, they come with the device. Because of that, we get to see the patterns that are met. When one device does the same thing as another device, we can look at that and say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we did this in the core in a common way so that everybody gets it and it works? so you don't make the same mistakes over and over and over. And then we say, oh look, these 4 drivers from these different companies can be merged into one. Microsoft and their way they did their operating system is they have to keep the old backward compatibility to their driver interface. Because our drivers are in the kernel, we can change that interface and modify it based on what happens. They have to keep multiple versions of their USB stack in the kernel and maintain them over time. And that's their business decision, and that's great. I understand their niche. Ours is we rewrite it, we make it smaller. So Linux drivers are at least 1/3 smaller than other drivers for other operating systems. So just by a pure size of the code, you have enhanced reliability.
Free software ends up being able to much more quickly adapt to environments and fix bugs because you don't have to wait for a single authority or a single person to get around to fixing those bugs.
Overall, Linux allows you to create an operating system to build a product on. So like build cell phones, the Android guys did it. Palm, all those people did phones for a long time with Linux in it before people realized it. Supercomputer guys built giant supercomputers in ways they wanted to, and they took Linux and modified it to make it work. Google built a giant cluster out there. Amazon's cloud computing initiative, what they've done with Linux is just amazing. Things that they couldn't do with any other operating system because they didn't have access to the source.
I remember when I was 17 or 18 and, long hair, I made a t-shirt, living with my parents, full of acne and insecurity. And my brother came to stay with me for 2 weeks. And of course we hated each other. And I was using Windows one day and I was getting frustrated with it. And he basically said, why are you using that thing? It's Mickey Mouse. And he was a sysadmin. And he said, do you want to use this thing called Linux? I'd never heard of it. And I said, what's that? And he said, it's Unix, which I'd heard of as this big, complicated thing that people with beards tended to use. I worked in a bookshop at the time, and he said you can get it on the back of a book, and it's still free. And so we went and got it, and he installed it for me, and it literally took 2 weeks, and he actually used a soldering iron because there was something wrong with my hard drive. He had it all open, sprawled all over the thing. And when it was finally on there, it's all text, and he just left me the username and the password to log in with, and then he left the following day. And I was stuck there with this huge book and this Post-it note. And I logged in, I had no idea what was going on. So I opened up the book and I started reading, and a lot of the technical mumbo jumbo I didn't understand. It was too technical for me. But I remember reading the introductory section about community and how this software was put together by volunteers all over the world who share their contributions into one pool. And I just thought that was fascinating. I mean, at the time, the internet was fascinating, but the internet was very much something you consumed content from. You went to websites. But with this, it was like you were interacting with people and you were creating something together. And I thought that was really interesting. The mechanics of how this thing was created could pave the way for something even better to be created, to solve the problems that were present in the system. The opportunity for people to work together around a common mission, a common goal, is what's made all of this possible.
You can't easily go into a computer store, buy a computer, and Linux is just there. You can do it in some places. Dell will sell you Linux pre-installer in the machines, but the common case is not that. So even to get into Linux, normally you'd have to decide to install your own operating system. And at that point, most people say, what? Install my own operating system? No, thank you.
Linux has got this potential, this great ability to grow very quickly with everybody working on it. And Linux is a great example of open source, and it's probably one of the best originating ones, but that's spreading to a large number of things.
The web is built mostly on Linux. Free and powerful software creates a market for people who can customize it for others.
I started off as a print designer. The web thing kind of came about. I knew absolutely nothing about programming and really never wanted to. I decided to kind of jump in the game, decided to jump in with PHP. Kind of learn that. These open source platforms kind of came about, WordPress being one, and you jump in there Sure, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but if you have a question about anything, and I never claim to be the greatest programmer whatsoever, but if you have a question about anything or how to do something, the answer's out there. Their codex, their manual is super searchable. All the information is there that allows a person like myself, knew nothing about coding, to sort of jump right into that arena and actually now just build some pretty robust, amazing sites.
A kernel, graphical interface, and web browser are the basic software for a desktop computer. But for everyone from secretaries to CEOs, the office productivity applications are the most important. There are billions of documents out there in a file format so arcane that only Microsoft Office can fully understand them. LibreOffice, which is based on OpenOffice, is the best free application suite, but it's still unknown to the average person.
Microsoft has some assets like Office that have stayed strong, and there's so much room for innovation in those. So, that's probably the most amazing asset that Microsoft has, is that globally, the way people get productivity with Outlook, Word, they maintain that position, and there's so much more that they are doing. And, I get to push a little bit and share ideas in my part-time work.
Microsoft Office is critical to the Windows ecosystem. Without Office, Windows is pretty useless. You can play solitaire on it. Of course, nowadays you can browse the web, but Office brings so much more, particularly for a business, for analytics. You can not just write letters to your family, you can fill in government forms, you can model the world. You can take reality and crunch it in number form in your spreadsheet and see what we should do. Lots of spreadsheets are used to make business decisions. Should we make more black cars or green cars? Which is selling? What should we do? Should we do a marketing campaign? So you can get very excited about the wobbly windows and the funny effects and the glass stuff, but at the end of the day, Office is where the value is. So from a code perspective, LibreOffice is around half the size of the Linux kernel. I would argue from a complexity perspective, we are significantly more complicated. If you go to universities, they'll teach you courses on how to implement a kernel or how to implement a compiler, and that's well understood. It's less well understood how to implement an Office suite, and it's significantly more complicated, and the code is much more coupled. Linus Torvalds would say that the Linux kernel is kind of a done problem. Go and hack somewhere else. LibreOffice is extremely challenging code base, but it's an extremely good one for students and people wanting to get involved with professional development.
Vendor lock-in is a big problem because what happens is you start a business, you install a ton of Windows machines, you put Microsoft Office on those machines, you save your documents in Microsoft Word format, and you're always going to need Microsoft Word format to open them again, which means you're always going to have to pay for it.
The problem with a proprietary format is really one of vendor control. That vendor gets to choose exactly what goes into the standard, and what goes into the standard is really some kind of silhouette of their Office software. So what ends up in there is all of this detail around the edges of what is perhaps 20 years of accumulated baggage. It looks like this vast mound of unnavigable stuff that just ends in there if you're not careful.
OpenDocument is a better format because it reuses existing standards and was created by a diverse community.
If you look at the genesis of ODF and DocX, I think they're both rather different. So ODF is really the open document format. It was produced by multiple vendors working on producing a real standard that can be used for multiple implementations. So I think there's a degree of compromise in there. There's a degree of working together with other people, actually producing suites and actually changing the standard. That's critically important, that we open the market for Office software so other people can provide suites and that they compete against each other in the common good. LibreOffice grew out of some frustrations with the OpenOffice project. There were many problems with that. I think it's well described as a problem for every solution. When Oracle acquired Sun, we were very hopeful that things would improve. Sadly, that didn't occur. And so we created LibreOffice to really actually start doing those things that we knew we needed to do to make LibreOffice more relevant, improve quality, to make it more viable, and better interoperability too. Free software is a real enabler of a local business because not only are you going to need help migrating to LibreOffice, some help, and Collabora provides those services and has partners that do that, and that brings money into the local economy. Local companies can exploit niches and provide services that are just not possible for a large company to provide. We have some amazing volunteers that have contributed just fantastic features that people see in their millions and appreciate. From the community perspective, that's relatively easy. That's the easy part. Branding is a different problem. We have a significant brand problem getting the word out about LibreOffice.
Donations to the foundation responsible for LibreOffice are much smaller than the amount of money Microsoft receives for Office. What LibreOffice needs is more money and programmers. Neil Armstrong may have been the first one to step on the moon, but Margaret Hamilton was the lead engineer for the software that got him there. Back then, programming was considered secretarial work, mostly done by the organized women, while piloting of the dangerous aircraft was done by the more expendable men. Today there are special events to teach programming, but it isn't part of the daily classroom. Math is taught with pencil and paper, as it has been for hundreds of years. Computers can be excellent teachers because they allow children to explore and work at their own pace. Python is a programming language that 8-year-olds can start writing, and then spend a lifetime mastering. Few schools teach Python today. Instead, many kids are taught visual languages they will quickly outgrow and aren't used in the real world. Using Python and the Sage Math Library, we can create a new form of math and science education.
It's weird because every single thing you do as an educator, involving mathematics at least, is open except possibly the software that you use to illustrate something. If you're in a class and you're showing something or describing some theorem or some bit of mathematics, and a student asks you, why this, why that, what's going on, who did this, every single question you can answer. But if they ask you, how does that program draw that picture, or compute that integral or whatever, then if you're using a proprietary system, you're kind of shut off from finding out what the answer is, which seems really strange. Some people, like me, are extremely annoyed by this and don't want mathematics to be like this for the kids of the future, and other people are perfectly happy with it. And so there's this sort of conflict. It's really sad when the field for doing mathematics is not very level, where there are very smart people all over the world, kind of equally distributed, but the access to resources for kind of stupid reasons aren't equally distributed. In mathematics, it's all about trying to understand something more deeply. You have some basic thing like some fact, and you want to understand it. The more you understand it, you get really excited, and your pulse quickens, and you just feel like you're accomplishing something if you understand that fact more and more. And by having access to the source code that lets you compute with some mathematical object, you can dramatically deepen your understanding of that object. You can add little bits of extra code in there and see what happens. It's really, really fun. Maybe they really want to look under the hood and see what's really going on with the code. There's some very easy way when you're using Sage to see the underlying source code that's being run when you ask for a calculation.
Freedom to tinker is an expression that you'll hear a lot. I want to be able to open up a device and see how it works and play with it and make it better. Kids were getting consoles and, it's a black box and you can sit down and play games. You should be a consumer of media rather than a producer of media, rather than someone that makes things. And there's this great movement about in the free software movement about making things and tinkering, and that's really what makes the engineers and scientists of tomorrow.
We can hack into this mainframe. Oh man, I love that video games have finally folded in on themselves. We've gone from the action used to be slay the dragon, right? Yeah. Now it's, let's go into a basement and play with computers and servers!
And we often see in schools that people teach programming or IT, but it's actually just typing into a word processor or a spreadsheet. You're not actually learning the key skills you need to program, and so you don't learn to understand computers, which is so vital in the modern world. Everything's driven by software. If our children don't understand it, we're doomed.
I've always been an entrepreneur, right? When I was younger, I was selling candy door to door and all that type of stuff, and really figuring out programming and learning web development from the very start was, whoa, I can build businesses by myself, just sitting in front of a computer. The idea that the internet gives us the ability to connect to anybody now. You can build on top of that platform. You can create your own business And the way you do that is through programming. And it's very easy to do. And that's why a lot of these hackathons and these startup weekends and all these events there are now, these kids get together and they'll just spend, a few hours working on something and something can come out of it.
In the digital age, communities can create things together without being in the same location. But where's the fun in that? Conferences, hackathons, and other events are taking place all over the world, and they are a great way to meet people and exchange ideas.
We're at MHacks. This is the third event that we've held. We call it the most epic college hackathon. Programming in the classroom doesn't necessarily teach you all the stuff that you need to know, to actually go out and either get a job or, contribute to a project. What you learn in the classroom is this algorithm is faster than that one, stuff like that. And that's definitely useful, but to actually be able to go out and make things is totally different.
Hacking for me is, it has nothing to do with cyber hacking or hacking someone's Facebook or information. Hacking for a hacker like those that come to MHacks is all about being able to learn very quickly, being able to produce a solution to a problem really, really quickly, and basically hacking together a solution to a problem.
The most fun thing about programming for me is just the amount of power that I feel that I have control over everything on the internet. I see a bunch of data and I can scrape it and I can use it and I can analyze it and I can put it on a website and put that out to display to people, and I can write whatever I want to and it costs me nothing.
With programming, I can literally just open up my computer and start learning whatever I need to learn and create whatever I want to create. It's really hard for me to find a limit to the things that you can do just with your own curiosity and drive.
Programming is kind of seen as an elite thing, and it shouldn't be, because programming is going to be akin to driving in the future. Everything has a computer now, and that's not going to go away. So you need to know how to use your stuff, how to use your tools.
A couple years ago, I tried learning C++ on my own, and it was actually really difficult. I didn't know what I was doing. But then I started trying Python, and it's super simplistic, which I was actually really surprised with. So I feel like now that I'm learning Python, I might actually be able to get into programming.
I like Python a lot because it's, it's free as in Libre, free as in speech. So there aren't restricted licenses attached to it. It's not platform specific, so you can write it on Linux and then run it on Windows, and all my friends use different operating systems, so it's super easy to collaborate regardless. And it's an interpreted language, so it's easy to debug because you can run a few lines in a terminal and call methods individually without having to compile and make sure that all your stuff is in order for the entire thing. You can just run what you need to.
Python's a very general mainstream language, certainly one of the top 5 or 10 most popular interpreted programming languages, and you can do a wide range of things in it. You can write a web server, you can write a game, you can write code for doing mathematics, you can do a very wide range of things, and it's not really aimed at any one particular domain. It's very, very general, which is great because it attracts a huge range of users, and it attracts a wide range of different people and companies that like to contribute to it, making it better. So I did program when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. I spent a lot of time in Fred Meyer in their computer section, which they don't have anymore, programming in BASIC and learning to program, in fact, from other kids. The language we used then is very similar and immediate like Python is now. So I could easily imagine 8-year-olds today using Python in a similar capacity, especially via their cell phones or over the web or whatever. And they really have a full, very powerful, very general purpose programming language at their disposal.
Python is a programming language where you tell a computer to do something. Computers are dumb and you have to tell them what to do. You have to make sure everything is in order and you always have to double check your work. We've learned how to write little pieces of code and make them one big thing. Programming can be hard because there can be a lot of lines of code and it takes time to type all of them. You can make all sorts of shapes, or you can even draw cars and a bunch of different things. You can do anything basically that your mind can think of.
We do programming because it's the most interesting thing you can do. It's like cerebral, and you actually build something practical. So it's not like playing chess. There's an end result, and you build something big and interesting. I would do this even if I wasn't paid. But the fact that it's important enough to other people that they want to pay me to make sure that I can do it full time, I'll take it.
Many people are frustrated with current technology. The fight for freedom continues to the next generation of people and devices. The trends are not positive. Digital Rights Management, or DRM, controls the use of content. DRM restricts DVDs and Blu-ray, e-books, cable TV, web video, and even coffee machines and tractors. DRM is fundamentally insecure while adding costs and difficulties for both sides, consumers and creators.
There's nothing free about Android, as we certainly have asserted in a number of cases. That there's an intellectual property royalty due on that. Whether they happen to charge for their software or not is their business decision.
The Android ecosystem took off because of all the free software already available. Even so, everyone, including Google, builds a lot of proprietary code on top. Therefore, Android customers complain about the unwanted add-on bloatware, bugs, and discontinued support for older devices.
The Central Intelligence Agency has lost control of highly classified documents and computer code that describe top-secret techniques for intercepting phone calls, reading encrypted text messages, and turning televisions into eavesdropping devices.
The WikiLeaks Vault 7 release showed that governments and hackers can take control of nearly every device on the planet. If a cyber weapon is stolen, it can be exploited by anyone until it's fixed, which can be years later. Since the creation of the automobile, people have dreamt of cars that can drive themselves. Any camera can record pictures of the road, but it takes artificial intelligence to interpret and safely navigate it. Creating autonomous vehicles that can handle bad weather and unexpected pedestrians is a difficult challenge. Most corporations and public universities are working in secret, reinventing the proverbial wheel. We tried to interview Ford and GM engineers to ask basic questions, but many details are confidential. This secretive culture impedes progress and leads to less reliability. The good news is that it requires extremely simple software to let us take a nap on highways in good driving conditions. Companies like Delphi Automotive demonstrated this years ago. As robotic cars become reality, flying taxis and other fun toys will appear. Vision and control software are the biggest challenge in building a robotic butler or maid that can cook and iron clothes. With a few $1,000s for hardware, you could build a plastic robot as well trained as Alfred from Batman, and even able to learn personal preferences. Software and technology are rapidly changing many aspects of life, but it has personal implications for healthcare.
Everybody here goes to a radiologist, and they take an x-ray and so forth, and they say, oh, you're fine. I would much rather have the computer analyze the radiology picture and then advise the doctor. And I would pay a premium for that because that doctor is going to get a better result. The reason I mention radiology is that the computer vision stuff is better now than human vision. Now that's in and of itself, that's a pretty big deal, right? So what do you do with vision aside from exist, right? Dermatology, radiology, things which involve vision skills. These are relatively automatable. And that doesn't mean the dermatologist goes away, but it means that he or she becomes more efficient, does a better job, it is more accurate. So you should expect that in the next decade, you'll use tools that with humans that make them more efficient, make you safer, more productive. Yeah, I think it's speculation what happens after that.
I did all this research about the ways that software is reviewed on these devices and what the process is at the FDA. I found that, in fact, the software is not really being reviewed that much. Now, anyone who is a software developer knows that all software has bugs. Things that I found about the FDA that were quite, I say shocking, but it's a terrible pun, were that the FDA doesn't actually review the software on most of its implanted devices that it reviews. It only reviews the software if there's a problem. They don't also request the software because they're not reviewing it. So they don't maintain a repository of it. So in like a disaster scenario, the FDA or the government doesn't even have a copy of it. In a catastrophic situation, if you're relying on one company to fix your heart device if there's a problem, if it's vulnerable, then you're really out of luck. If it's free and open source software, then anyone can see the source code and anyone can make a patch. What we have in the medical device industry, or at least with my pacemaker, is the worst of both worlds. We have devices that have closed software. It's proprietary software, so people can't review it broadly. But we also have no encryption. So most of these devices are broadcasting signals all the time, and there's no encryption protecting us from having other people hack into them. There was a think tank that actually were able to hack into the device using just regular over-the-counter equipment. They were able to deliver unwanted shocks. They were able to put the device in test mode to run down the battery, and these devices are only as good as their batteries are. It's pretty terrifying how vulnerable these devices are, and it's this really kind of perverse result because you think that it's more vulnerable if you release the code for people to review. It's a little counterintuitive, but it's actually the reverse. We should publish the code so everyone can see it and make sure that it's safe and good, but we should put real encryption on it, real protections, real passwords, so that we know that these devices are not vulnerable to attacks. I want to be able to review the source code on my device. If I'm not a programmer, I want my friends to be able to do it. I want the think tank to do it. I want the university to do it. I want the world to be able to look at this software and make sure that it's safe. But that same logic not only goes for implanted medical devices, it goes for our cars. It goes for our voting machines and our stock markets. Anything that we rely on in our lives and for society should be reviewable by everyone.
Life is very complex. It has evolved over millions of years, developing all kinds of systems to keep us alive. There are many different analysis techniques in order to investigate a living being, and they all generate a huge amount of data to be analyzed.
Biology has become as much of a computational science as traditional lab science that it used to be. Once upon a time, people used to spend their entire PhDs studying one gene. Nowadays, we have these high throughput methods that allow us to investigate a whole genome, tens of thousands of genes in one experiment. On the other hand, various labs, people generally tend to focus on one particular angle, one particular technology. For instance, they can do proteomics or genomics or metabolomics. Whereas in order to really understand a complex problem, you need to look at it from many, many angles. Imagine you are waging let's say, a war against a disease. You really need different types of weapons. So it's absolutely crucial to have resources that gather data of various types in one place.
The National Center for Biotechnology Information, or NCBI, is the largest resource for information about health sciences. Inside the NCBI are archives with lots of data about many species of life.
The NCBI, being a government agency that is able to provide a variety of great access to scientists and a variety of different pieces of publications. They have access to genomic and proteomic data. And the best part about all of this is that it gives this idea a sense of community so that anything that gets discovered can be publicly available for other scientists to look at, to examine, and to further their own research.
It's hard to believe that just 2 months ago, this virus was unknown to us. We have already learned so much about it. We know its DNA. We know it can be transmitted from one person to other. We know that those most at risk are older people and those with underlying health conditions. But there is still a lot we don't know. We don't know the source of the outbreak. We don't know what its natural reservoir is, and we don't properly understand its transmissibility or severity. To defeat this outbreak, we need answers to all those questions. And there are tools we don't have. We have no vaccine to prevent infections and no therapeutics to treat them. To put it bluntly, we're shadow boxing. We need to bring this virus out into the light so we can attack it properly. That's why on February 11 and 12, we're convening a global research and innovation forum.
The World Health Organization, they've just asked for $500 million for research into the virus, which of course is wonderful. I hope they get it. We really need to get on top of viral infections. I mean, we're just in the Middle Ages in a lot of ways as far as viral infections is concerned. Antiviral drugs are very limited.
How can we possibly make things better? How can we improve the research speed and the accuracy of the results? The first issue that one needs to deal with is that of standards. If several thousand people generate data in different formats, nobody will be able to use that. So it's very important for the community to have some standards that specify how the data should look like. Another important step that the community could take is for major journals to require people to make their data available when a paper is submitted for publication. This is very important because, again, this is human nature. The tendency of most PIs is to hang very close to their data. So it's very important also that results can be verified and, most importantly, could be reanalyzed in conjunction with other data sets.
I think researchers could gain a lot of insight if some of the clinical trial data were available for additional mining or interpretation and so forth.
There is an ongoing debate about FDA approval process. So on the one hand, you have to be very careful. You cannot give a certain drug to millions of people potentially without testing it thoroughly. However, the current process can be extremely painful and extremely long, especially in those cases where there is compelling evidence that that particular drug candidate works. In some situations, the treatment can be found relatively rapidly, and it's a shame that treatment not to be made available to people who need it just because the drug has not been approved yet.
Patients with terminal conditions, terminal illness, should have access to experimental treatment immediately that could potentially save their lives. People who are terminally ill should not have to go from country to country to seek a cure. I want to give them a chance right here at home. It's time for Congress to give these wonderful, incredible Americans the right to try.
Right to try applies only to patients with terminal conditions. The FDA needs a modern approval process that also lets anyone with a debilitating disease try experimental cures. We should reform patent laws, prohibiting them from math, software, or biological genes. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. Bad laws can stifle progress and encourage monopolies and corruption. The power of community applies far beyond the internet. Every year, new movements are created that change the world. They can also help travel to the final frontier. Because of the high cost of rockets, the community surrounding space exploration is small today.
All systems are go. We're about 90 seconds from the launch of Space Shuttle Discovery. Discovery's onboard computers have primary control of all the vehicle's critical functions. T-minus 17 seconds and counting. 15, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery, returning to the space station, paving the way for future missions beyond. 67% of rated performance, reducing the stress on the shuttles and brakes through the sound journey. This will already 3.5 miles in altitude, 1.5 miles downrange traffic.
Now you want software wars, I can tell you about software wars. You think software is important to NASA? When I went in there, it was the end of the Mercury program, which didn't do much, into the Gemini program, which was, among other things, its primary purpose was to develop rendezvous. So you can imagine you're trying to shoot something up and have it find something else in space, hook up with it so people can get out and go back and forth or connect, whatever, which was the heart of the Apollo design. Well, that was all about software. With the shuttle, it got worse. On Gemini, it was a small little computer. It got quite a bit bigger on Apollo, but the computer was still nothing like you have in your pocket right now, which is kind of staggering when you think we went to the moon and back and did all the navigation, all the deliberations, control of the burns was all done with a computer that was no better than your iPhone. In fact, it was way inferior to your iPhone. You had to have boosters that you could light the fuse on and they would take off, but software was where it was at. Some of the biggest knockdown, drag-out meetings that I was at and contentious issues involved software. How to configure systems, how to respond to emergencies, how to decide if there was an emergency, and it was paramount to what we did and what we accomplished. But then I got into simulation. What's that about? Computers. Everything about it was computers. The hardware involved was almost incidental. It was just take a cockpit, put it on some actuator so you can jiggle it around and pipe some sound in and put some instruments in so the guy thinks he's in a spacecraft, but outside of that where it's all happening with software. It was pretty far-fetched to go to the moon when you think about it. In my day, I experienced what I thought was almost a crazy mandate. We did it. We put a man on the moon. We got him there, got him back alive, and had some narrow misses, and we were proud of what we had done.
When I was doing space missions, we were always limited by how much we could send up. You got little tiny instruments on a big satellite. It goes on a gigantic rocket. So it all comes down to what you can launch. We're always looking for more. Most of my interaction with NASA was on the space elevator, a concept that's been around since 1960. You have a string, a cable, with one end attached to the Earth and the other end up in space. Because the Earth is rotating, the upper end is basically thrown out away from the Earth, like if you spin a ball on a string around your head, it sticks out away. And then you can climb the rope to space. Modern version of that is, it's a cable made of high-strength materials, and it's got cars or climbers that are attached to the cable that go up and can go to orbit and deploy satellites. This is very different from the rockets. The rockets carry all their fuel. It's very heavy, very expensive. To go from rockets to the space elevator, you'll reduce costs of getting into space by hundreds to thousands of times. So instead of $10,000 a pound, it'll cost you $100 a pound to get into space. And you can have massive quantities. It's like a large railway going from Earth to space. It changes the entire aspect of space. Space is no longer this inaccessible location. You can go there. You can do what you want. You can make it into something that you want for the future. I want to go into space. I want other people to be able to. We just can't do that on the rockets. I saw in Arthur Clarke's book about the space elevator, and then I heard comments like, it simply can't be done. That's a statement that gets some people interested in doing it. And so that's where I started looking into the space elevator and found we could do it.
When I was 5 years old, I watched Neil Armstrong step out of the surface of the moon, and I don't know, it just instilled a huge passion in me for engineering and science and exploration, and I've been kind of crazy about rockets since I was a little boy.
Single entities have tried, and they haven't made it. NASA, Virgin Galactic, we had Spaceship One. They were great, but they're also very limited. So you need to broaden it. You need to get lots of people. You need to get interest. There needs to be returns. It's sort of an open source for space to get people in, doing the modeling, doing hardware development, doing the research, getting the funding. And it all needs to be an open source. It needs to come in from a lot of different places. From a technical standpoint, you could easily build the space elevator in about 10 years. You know, if you really got down and you said, we want to build this thing. You did sort of a Manhattan Project kind of thing where everybody's focused on it. You bring in who you need to, and you just do it. You could probably have space elevator up in about 10 years. From there, it would grow fairly dramatically.
I think the space elevator can be accomplished. I think it will be momentous. I think it will be beyond anything we'd ever imagined that we would try to do. There's no showstoppers per se. It's just technology, taking it a step at a time and figure what needs to be fixed, what needs to be designed.
The space elevator is estimated to cost $10 billion to create. NASA could take it on with their existing funding if they canceled projects made obsolete by the elevator. Many space elevator enthusiasts think strong nanotubes are impossible to manufacture, even though they carry around a supercomputer that runs on batteries in their pocket. Unfortunately, NASA hasn't asked commercial industry for help producing nanotube threads. For fastest results, we should create the elevator designs in public. Harnessing the intellectual power of universities can accelerate the process. Once the first elevator is completed, we could build a tremendous base on the moon within a year. You could arrange a trip from your phone.
This open source model isn't necessarily making a better world, it's making a better product. This is a really good way to create software. Now what you make that software do is something totally up to you. You can make software do bad things. You can make software do good things. But we're putting it out there without any restrictions on its use. So hopefully Linux will create a better world, but again, we're just creating software.
I know from our sources deep inside those Silicon Valley institutions, they genuinely believe that they're going to produce artificial intelligences that are so powerful relatively soon that people will have their brains digitized, uploaded to these artificial intelligences, and live forever in a simulation, therefore will have eternal life. It's a religion for atheists.
I suck at that, honestly, because I feel like it's so much more I probably can do with my phone and computer, like combined together, but I don't take the time out to learn those type of things.
A lot of what's going to determine the quote-unquote software wars between open source free software and proprietary is basically going to be economics. It's been widely publicized that the Navy's been asked to cut 25% of IT spending. You're going to see there come a point in time where the balance is going to have to be much more on the free and open side, as opposed to what we have now, which is all proprietary, where things are reinvented each time and charged for each time. As taxpayers and citizens, that's what we really should be pushing our government to think about is, what are the economic benefits of using, and not only using, but contributing back to free and open source projects so that they can become more self-sustaining even more than they are today.
But I think in the open source or free software, it's changed because it's quality. I don't think people realize that companies and individuals are starting to work together in open source, and it's becoming very reliable, very secure, and very capable type of set of functionality.
Because it's free, it's really empowering. The ability to download some free software, open up the source code for it, be able to learn from it and build upon it yourself with no restrictions. It just unlocks infinite creative potential.
One of the problems that people face in this area is that they think they want to create something new. I want to become Linus Torvalds. My advice to you is to join other people, because the real goodness in free software comes not from doing things by yourself, but by doing things together.
I don't think you can stop that. I think the Microsofts out there and the other proprietary companies out there would like to see it stopped because it threatens our profit model. It threatens their control not only of money, but of information. There's nothing more valuable than being able to control information, not just the flow of information, but information itself. And I think the Wikipedias out there and the other projects out there that are not just liberating the information, but gathering the information and disseminating it and keeping it free are ultimately just going to eclipse the proprietary model.
Source code is so complicated. Any interesting project, even a small project, is so complicated that I claim that no developer can really understand the problem anymore. It really boils down to that. Yes, science spread through the world because it works. You can't do complex things in a hidden environment where you try to control it, because the control will basically limit your technology. But whoever says that Linux is a cancer or Linux is communist is just uneducated and stupid. It's that simple. It's like saying science is communist or science is a cancer. That's completely idiotic. It is beyond stupid. If you don't spread your ideas in the open, if you don't allow other people to look at how your ideas work and verify that they work, you're not doing science. One of my favorite quotes from history is Isaac Newton, who was apparently not a very nice person, but he was certainly smart. He said, "If I had seen further, it has been by standing on the shoulders of giants," where the whole point is, in order to reach greatness, you have to be able to build on what has gone before you.
And so we will decide who wins based on what people used and what the general population of users use.
It's about people having the ability to control their own destiny when it comes to technology, and that's the most important thing. And that's what open source has given us, and that's what's challenged the industry as well. I mean, Microsoft are a different company because of open source.
100 years after the transistor was invented, proprietary technology continues to dominate many aspects of society. Billions of dollars are wasted, while freedom and cooperation are hindered. The more we share scientific information, the faster we can solve the challenges of the future.